It has been a while since I've done this. I'm a little rusty. Greetings. Hello. Salutations. I'm going to open up the chat and all the things today. I did a really exciting performance last night at the Museum of Science in Boston. I know I've not made a video here in a couple months because I've been making one big video that performed last night. Basically, I've been putting together this huge project where I debut a bunch of different XR virtual theater making technologies that are free and open source. And I put them all together in a big Shakespeare show and nerded out on stage. And I presented that last night, and it was fun and exciting. And for those that did not get to check it out, it is archived on the Museum of Science in Boston's YouTube channel, which should have a link down below. And what I figured I'd do is at the end of last night's performance, we did a Q&A, kind of a talk back, and a lot of great questions, ranging from how do I get a green screen to work, all the way up to how did this specific moment in the show happen? And the general tenor of the entire evening was kind of a, how did you, was that live with one camera? That doesn't make any sense. So I'm very excited that I broke some people's brains. This entire process and project broke my brain many, many times. And so what I figured I would do is there's about 70 cues in the show. I know. And so I thought I would go through all of those cues one by one while playing the video. And this kind of speaks to my overall culture of where I hope we are moving in digital narrative storytelling, in the sense that for many of us, we work for months, years on this incubated, beautiful project behind closed doors, and then we present it and we try to get all this marketing and media, and it's difficult in today's media ecosystem to make enough noise for the product, the thing, the presentation, the thing you want to sell tickets to, or the thing you want to sell a link to, or sell merch to. And so in many ways, there's this conversation of the content versus the storytelling product or the entertainment. And this is something I've been juggling a lot. It's why the entire Homebodies brand was created, is this balance of, I want to put out a steady stream of content to engage people, to interact, to let the audience feel like they're participating in my process. But then I still want to drive people to the actual content so that I can make a living as an artist. And so I'm not going to just be streaming what I did last night on my channel, or just standing it up and redoing it all over again, because I want you to support the Museum of Science in Boston and go watch it at their place. That's the, that is the show, that is the ticket, if you will. And instead, I'm going to use the opportunity of the process as my content. And again, this is all evolving. I'm making this up as I go along, but I want to be able to share it with folks in case they were curious, how do I stand up a similar project to what you did? So first and foremost, we got to get into pre-show. I have several pre-show cues here, A, B, C, showroom, check camera, check partner cameras, establish museum, remove green screen. This is all within OBS or Open Broadcaster software, which is completely free at OBSproject.com. I've done a video on that in the past. And what I've basically done is take that original video that I broke down how I did Henry V, and I've just applied it in a major way. So what I've done is basically just take that and gone, okay, how do I make an entire show out of what I did for that monologue, and really up the ante in every possible way and push the boundaries of what the tech, especially free tech, can do. Great collaborator I was speaking with, he calls it abandonware, is basically free software people put in the world until it stops working and then they kind of abandon it. So at any time, some of this stuff might break, but last night it all worked pretty smoothly, and I'm pretty excited about that. So my pre-show AQ is just a list of things I need to do physically, and that is setting up the tripod. I set it up about 49 inches from the floor, 12 feet away from the far back corner of my little nook where I filmed it. I hung up the same green tablecloth that I'm using to remove my backdrop right now, and I had some gym floor mats that kind of puzzle together that were kind of this mint green. So I had to grab that green and remove it, and then I had to grab the mint green and remove it, and that took away all my green screen elements. The leftover space that could not be filled by the frame, by the green screen, I then created an image mask that just ignored those regions. And then it did have, you know, there's a couple times during the show where you can see me get like cut off where I leave the image mask. But for the most part, that allowed it to really give this nice, clean background removal. I'm using a GH5, which is a DSLR camera, a micro four thirds camera, and I am using that, they have a V-Log, which is kind of gives you the most amount of color data that you can kind of color correct within OBS. I used 400 ISO, 180 degrees, and I shot in 4K so that I would have the most amount of data possible, even though I was going to stream out in HD. But this allows me, and you'll see we'll get into this later, this allows me to zoom in on certain regions without diminishing quality completely, because I'm starting with as many pixels as possible. Cool. I used a Sigma Cine 18-35 zoom lens. I put it on 19 millimeters, opened it wide up. The aperture was set to 4. And I focused basically about that 12 feet distance away, and I shot kind of full frame in that essence. And then anytime I wanted to zoom in on myself, again, I'm shooting 4K, I'm shooting on a wide open lens, and that was all done digitally then to be able to manipulate a close-up just by grabbing my image. Do it real fast here. If I just grabbed myself in real time and stretched myself out, I could just make myself bigger just by stretching myself. So that looks awesome. Let's go back. So put myself back to normal size, transition that over. I'm using a studio mode in OBS today instead of compositing on the fly, so that way I can literally look at all of my cues and read off for you how they worked while still maintaining this frame and not messing that up. Sweet. So without too much fuss and further ado, that's my physical setup. I then had a backlight that was giving me a little pink hue to salvage some of my hairline. I had two kind of key lights that were lighting the green screen and kind of backlighting me to separate me from the backdrop. I had a giant ring light behind the camera that was giving me a nice front illumination. And because it was a theater stage show, I actually used my ceiling fan as what kind of looked like a giant spotlight that was just harsh and above me. It kind of emulated some more of that theatrical lighting rather than film lighting. So that was a little trick I did for that. For audio, I used this little lavalier microphone that Bluetooths straight into the GH5. In filmmaking, that's been a great tool because then I don't have to sync audio and video. In this case, what was great is it meant that whatever this mic heard got streamed. I streamed that into OBS, and then I had a bunch of sound cues prepared that would trigger when I went through the variety of cues to give some music stingers or some little sound effects here and there. I do welcome anybody to chat in the chat wherever you're watching this video right now, and supposedly that will come to me from Restream. We'll see if that's working. Don't have a chat yet, but if you're there, just say hello so that I know that it's working. Otherwise, I'll just talk to myself, which I'm very good at if you watch last night's show. QB, or pre-show B, is then all the stuff I have to do inside of OBS. So what I'm doing is I'm taking an HDMI cable, it's a 25-foot HDMI cable coming from the DSLR camera into my desktop computer. I'm using the Elgato Cam Link to be able to, as a capture card, to be able to see what the DSLR sees and treat it as a web camera, essentially, inside of OBS. So I have to set that that scene inside. Oh, this is something people probably know, but if you're newish to this like me, this was game-changing. Instead of in every single scene, in every single cue, having to set what camera we're using, I actually created a scene called main camera, and that allowed me to remove the backdrop, dial in the color correction, get the focus exactly how I wanted it, and kind of establish what my camera was. And then that scene was embedded in every single cue, so that basically I only have to change that one cue of the camera if I want to change the camera overall settings or lighting or the green screen removal. And that was just game-changing for me as far as salvaging everything that I was doing. Cool. So I set that kind of main camera in OBS, that main scene. I made a plate, a screen grab plate of what the full frame looked like so I could remove the green screen based off of how the angle of the camera was that day. turned basically all the non-green areas into black and all the green areas into white, and then brought that in as an image mask over top of my camera scene so that it basically ignored the areas that were not going to be chroma keyed out. I then adjusted the green screen as needed, set the GH audio to the cam link mic, and tested those levels. That's setting up my microphone and making sure it works. I then set up 2 OBS.ninja rooms, which is something we'll get to later, which is how I brought scene partners onto the show. And then at the end of the show, we reversed, and I OBS.ninja'd to the museum so that the museum could host the Q&A with me actually on their stage. Basically, I took over control of everything for the presentation itself so that I was streaming the best possible quality. I wasn't like going to the museum to go up to the satellites. One trip to the satellites is enough. And then we swapped for the Q&A so that way they could take complete control over the Q&A. So that was fun. Oh, I used, I went through and there's a lot of layers that I enable during the actual presentation. So before each show, I have to disable all of those layers. And then I hardwired from my desktop into the Ethernet just so that I wasn't relying on that little bit of latency with my live stream or with my Wi-Fi. So I was hoping to get a little more robust signal. And again, it's still early days and all this stuff. It's still at the mercy of what I can afford. So there were moments where I got a little pixely, but for the most part, we got actually a pretty clean streamed image, which was pretty awesome. So going into pre-show, I know. I open up Streamdeck, which is what I'm using to stream the entire show. I should probably do that now so that I can actually explain how that worked. This is they have a 30-day free trial, and then you pay like $4 a month. And it is the device or the app that lets me turn my phone into a remote control for the entire show. So I have to basically set up the Stream Deck before the show with the buttons or the cues that I want to trigger. No, thank you. It's fun when spam calls you. And I was about to show my phone too. So I won't dox whoever this spammer is. I'll just wait until they stop calling me so I can actually show the remote. So I've got this little remote set up here. I know that is freaking out my green screen. Let me see if I can zoom in or focus in on it. There we go, focus my lens a little bit. And these are basically the cues that I decided on to be able to run the entire show. So you'll see in this bottom corner here is just a next button. And all that is a hotkey that basically just presses the down arrow, which tells OBS, when I'm remember to be in OBS, to just go to the next cue. It's just down, 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 down. And that's how I'm controlling 90% of the show, is I've built these cues and I'm just going next, 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 using that hotkey. So then next to that you see blackout, and that's just an easy way to just black out the scene anytime. It just fades to black and takes me to a fully black screen. There's a few little breaks during the show where I know I'm about to rattle off a bunch of technical jargon, and so I like to have a little sip of water before I do that. And so usually I've built in these places in the show that I kind of bring the lights down, I get to reset the stage or take a sip of water or something, and then the lights come up in the next cue. And by lights up and down, I mean an alpha video that fades black and then fades up, which we'll get into a little later. There's this snap switch. I use the Snap Camera, which is a free desktop tool from Snapchat, where basically it can take whatever your webcam sees and treat it as like your phone to be able to apply filters and any kind of Snapchat effects in real time. Then you have to bring the Snap Camera, what the Snap Camera is putting out, into OBS as its own camera. So whenever there's both of me on stage, if I'm toggling back and forth between the two, you will see some ghosting where there's basically the live version of me with no latency because it's just my webcam into OBS, and then going through Snap Camera, getting a filter, and then coming into OBS, which is just a few frames off. Just a little delay in that process. But that's the way that I'm able to quickly apply. Oh good, I'm out of focus because I unfocused myself. Oh, look at that beard. You're welcome. Quick beard shot. But I use the Snapchat to put on 3 different filters to demonstrate the ability to do augmented costumes and makeups on the fly. So that's my Snapchat switch, which basically is a hotkey that is programmed to open up Snapchat, change the filter to whatever the next hotkey is, then reopen OBS so that I can keep hitting that next button without getting out of sync. So that's what that button does every single time, is it switches basically between a new filter by going to Snapchat, changing the filter, going back to OBS, changing the scene. Then we have this little button, which is a silhouette button. And what that basically does is I just took my own camera image and doubled it on top of myself. And this allows me to toggle on and off what looks like a spotlight, because when the silhouette is on, I've just pumped up the contrast, taken all the brightness out, desaturated it, and it just looks like a black shadow covering my face. So when I toggle that on, it looks like I'm in darkness, and when I toggle it off, it looks like suddenly you put a spotlight on my face. Super lo-fi and simple, but it's a cool little trick to be able to just toggle on and off. I then have this button that is Hub's Room. Keep in mind, I'm demonstrating a variety of different technologies in real time, and they take up a lot of CPU individually, and so when you do that all together simultaneously, it is exponentially complicated to run the show simultaneously. I'm sure throughout last night's performance, you could hear a lot of warring computers just kind of being taxed to their bitter edge. But that was basically, so I want to preserve when I bring up the Hub's Room, and so that's in the middle of the show when I know I'm coming up on that cue. That opens up Chrome, opens up the link, and gets me set up to be able to enter the future stages and do that walkthrough in that demo. There's this lovely Run Show cue that I built, and that was just so that I could, at top of show, when I'm all filled with nerves, I hit that button and it opens up all the programs with all the settings, hits all the hotkeys, opens up all the sessions, so that I know that I've got everything on the screen where I've decided I want to keep it for the show. On that note, the way that I was able to monitor the entire show is I took my TV and I actually put it on a chair next to me so that I could kind of see what my computer desktop was seeing in real time throughout the show. I also took a music stand that I put all the different technical things that I needed on them for each demo. So I started with just a wireless keyboard and mouse. Then in the middle of the show, I pulled in a different wired mouse that was attached to a laptop that was very precariously balanced on a couple other things. And then I quickly put on the headset and the controllers when I went over for the VR demo. So that's how I controlled the show generally. And then I'll go up to this top corner, I'll skip ahead and show, this is called Slideshow. And instead of making like 8 cues to go through 8 slides, I just made 1 cue with a slideshow, and then this triggered the next slide within that cue. So that was just a quick way to like consolidate how many cues I was flipping between. All of this is really cool and really great. Again, it's a $4 app. However, you get what you pay for, and sometimes, especially when I'm using Wi-Fi for a million other things, it's not very reliable. And so sometimes, even in last night's show, it triggered multiple cues at the same time. Sometimes it didn't fire when I wanted it to. And so because of that, whenever I was going to actually do a moment of performance, a moment of Shakespeare, I instead hard programmed in the cue I wanted to go to. So instead of just hitting next and hoping and praying, I knew that if I hit the Hamlet button, it's going to start the Hamlet cue. The Hounds button is going to come on the Henry V moment where I talk about hounds. The bottom wake up is in the midsummer when I'm pretending to be asleep and I want to be able to just wake up and trust the background is going to change behind me. The Macbeth wide is when I want to just go to the wide and be able to perform the Macbeth speech. And the Prospero dark is my little quick and dirty salvage act for, at one point I turn off the lights because I tear everything down at the end of the show to be able to demonstrate that I've just been doing this from my apartment the whole time. So I wanted to be able to just know that I could hit that button and the color settings were adjusted for when I've taken off all the lights. And then just as a total emergency, I have a wide fade and a close fade button. And those are my bail buttons. Those are basically if in the middle of the show something goes horribly, horribly wrong, If I'm in kind of a close-up moment, I hit the wide. If I'm in a wide moment, I hit the close, and it just fades to me on the red curtain of the museum, and I can kind of figure it out from there. So that was just kind of my oh no button that I could hit at any time. So that is the overview of setting up the show. Oh no, that's not the overview of setting up the show. That's the overview of the remote. I'm now realizing how absurd this was. I set up the snap camera on the first cue, which is the gesture. I opened up those two OBS.ninja windows and coordinated with the team members at the museum who were my guest stars in the performance. So they were each on their own OBS.ninja stream that I could pull in and composite. And what's great about OBS.ninja is you bring it into OBS and you set it and forget it. So you basically size them the way you want them, you put them where you want them, you composite them, and then you can just pull up that cue anytime. So if they got disconnected and logged back in, we wouldn't have to start all over and reset. I owe a much longer video on that. I know, I promise I will get to it. I had to set up the Hubs room for that demo, which is the Mozilla Hubs Future Stages room, and then I had to log in on the headset, the VR headset, to go into the room as an avatar. That might have been actually the hardest part of the entire show, oddly enough, because I basically have to leave this VR headset turned on and logged into Mozilla Hubs for basically 50 minutes while I do the beginning of the show before I get to that part. And the point of the, I think the battery life of the device is 2.5 hours. The entire purpose of it is designed to be more efficient and to go to sleep when you're not using it. So I actually had to put tape over the kind of forehead detector so that it would think that I was connected the entire time, and I had to disable all the settings that told it to go to sleep or to save battery, all of that. And so that's just sitting there turned on the entire show. And if I was bad at timing, I would probably not be able to do that part of the demonstration when I got to it if I wasn't careful. I then have to separately set up the Kinect, the Xbox Kinect, which is a motion capture depth camera that I show a volumetric demonstration and a motion capture demonstration. And the way I did that is I could not get that to interface elegantly with my Mac. And so I'm running that into a PC laptop, and then I'm using basically NDI or my network to be able to just send the IP of my PC laptop to my web desktop inside of OBS. So it's basically a browser feed of what the laptop is seeing inside of OBS. So that was basically, I've got a Xbox camera going into a PC laptop, which is then over my network, sending the signal to my Mac to then be in OBS to broadcast. So a little bit of a hop, skip, and a jump, but it allowed me to then really have a dedicated machine for dealing with that demonstration, which was really nice. So that's all pre-show. My goodness. And now I think we should get into the actual show. So I'm going to go into this cue, and I'm going to take away my backdrop by instead showing you the actual Museum of Science's YouTube page and channel and video. And I'm going to play through this video and talk over it like a commentary track on a movie. You are about to see me on screen, so we don't need a huge me right now. We could take a small me. So let's transition that over and give you that to watch. And now basically I'm just going to be able to open up each cue as we get to it and talk through it as a general commentary track. And if you have any questions or reactions, feel free to shout them at me. Otherwise, leave them in the comments, and it may be inspiration for larger deep dives that I might do down the road. Starting off, this is Q1 we are looking at, and this is what is called a plate shot in filmmaking. And this is what inspired it. I actually ran through these first 8 cues last night at the Q&A when prompted by the audience, and that is what inspired me to do this video today. So when I first got approached by the museum about this talk, I said, hey, could I have just some empty shots of the stage to see if I can put myself on your stage? And so they just went into the theater, went to a couple different locations, and just rolled camera for a few seconds on an empty stage. And then I just looped this and threw it behind me. So this is how I'm going to be putting myself on stage throughout the course of the show. I wanted to open with their stage to kind of give us a sense of place and then move out of that. So we open on the stage, which is basically just a video layer that is playing. It's going to fade to black, and then it's going to fade up from black into nothingness, like a transparency. And this is called an alpha layer or an alpha video, which is, I've been saving out as ProRes 4444 with an alpha layer. And what that basically means is that it's just going to, it will see whatever is underneath the video. So there's basically this video playing, and as it dissolves and fades away, it reveals me underneath it. So we'll take a look at that to open as it plays. So the lights go down, lovely, lovely, and the lights come up, and I am on stage. And all that has been is that I'm now on a new backdrop. My live video layer is in front. I have that silhouette layer that we discussed, where I've basically doubled the video and taken all the brightness out and upped the contrast so that it looks like there's darkness in front of me. And if you peer through, you can see that I have a Snapchat filter of makeup on my face. So this is the first cue into the second cue of the show, and you're going to notice the camera's moving. What? That doesn't make any sense. I thought you said the camera didn't move. Well, the camera's not moving. This is actually, Q2 is just Q1 stretched. So we're using what is called motion transitions, which is a plugin you can get for OBS, where I basically take Q1, build an identical Q2, and then stretch out everything that Q1 sees. And then when it transitions between the two, the computer's like, uh-oh, I gotta go from this size to this size. And it's filling in the gaps on that, which appears to be a digital zoom, which is very cool. So here we are, digitally zooming in, and I start delivering the monologue with makeup on my face. And now I want to break out of that. So I do a transition in OBS, and now we're on a new backdrop, just my live video. We've taken off the snap camera, so we have slightly better quality. And this is just me green screened out in full frame on a fake backdrop, basically on a backdrop that was made by Amir Cohen, who's an award-winning stage and lighting designer who did the first 8 cues of the show. So you'll notice that I have what appears to be a shadow, and that's a real-time shadow, which is basically like that silhouette layer. I just threw it at 45 degrees on the floor, and it will follow me badly wherever I go, but it sells the effect right now that looks like the lighting has changed and that I'm being lit from the front on a stage, which is pretty cool. So I hang out here for a bit, and then you're going to see the use of another alpha layer. So right now we have a video behind me, my video, and now in front of me, a transparent video that has a cube appear. And I know roughly where that cube is going to be, and I have an audio cue that tells me it's coming, so I know when to put my hand out and where to put it. And it's going to look like I'm interacting with this cube, but all I'm doing is I've rehearsed it so that I move with the pre-recorded video, basically, that's playing on top of me, just like a 3D projection or a light effect that you would have rehearsed for a normal play. So I'm just going to cover over that, and I'm interacting with the cube, and all this is dance. I've rehearsed this dance. And now, suddenly I get covered up and we go into this tunnel. And this is 3D projection at its finest. Basically, Amir has created a front layer, which again is just an alpha layer, where this box comes and covers me. And as soon as it has completely covered me, it triggers to go to the next cue. So I'm basically treating the transition as this animated overlay so that you don't see the switch from Q3 to Q4. And then Q4 is just a video that plays that looks like we're going on a little ride. Here we go. And this just goes on for a little while, but at any time I can hit the button to go to the shattered explosion where it crashes and throws me down on stage. And to create this effect, basically, that's just me hitting the next cue once I am safely on the ground and ready to fall. And so I've put myself on the ground, and I'm just ready to immediately stand up, which looks like a camera movement, but it's just a trick of the eye. It's just that because I'm moving and the world is moving and we've rehearsed it at the same time, or I've rehearsed it with the video, I know how to make it look like, oh wow, it looks like the camera moved. And the camera hasn't moved at all. It's great. It's excellent. Now I'm just going to let the virtual world really sell itself, where those shards melt into the floor and then an XR stage comes up out of nowhere. And it's just really giving you the sense of how much we can do dynamically with the screen without changing anything. Then whenever I'm ready, I fire the next cue, which sends it into the floor and does this lighting effect. And this is basically just me triggering a lighting cue like I would in theater if I was able to control the booth from on stage. And then it's just going to start spinning. And this is just, it will loop and do this for as long as I want it to. But if I hit next, we're going to use that zoom feature again, so that it's going to transition into a zoomed up version of this and look like we pushed into me. So it's just going to zoom in, and then I hit next again, triggering the next cue, which is this lovely purgatory world, which will just loop for as long as I want to go, with a little alpha layer on top to do another little box gag. So we're just recycling these same ideas, but just trying to get more and more visual and more creative. And I hope that what you'll really observe throughout this cue rundown is that once you kind of get a sense of the same trick inside of OBS for how to basically treat lighting design and projection as virtual overlays, you then can really have a lot of freedom and fun with how you keep these things engaging with each other. So I sit here and chat while this thing loops over me. I know roughly where that box is, again, based off of an audio cue and rehearsing. And then I throw it away from myself, which is really just me disabling the cue as I move into the next cue with a nice little ripple transition. I jump to sell it, and this cue, I've taken my entire video, and in the past we've stretched it to make it kind of a zoom in. This, I'm making my video very, very small so that I appear to be smaller in the frame. It feels like we've zoomed far out, but we haven't. I've just shrunk the size of the video. So now I can be composited inside of this environment, which is very cool. And it just spins and hangs out while I talk up there. And then what I can do from here is the next cue is going to be a little pre-recorded piece of my volumetric video of basically creating a second version of me. So I'm going to pop out of myself like a seance. And that's just, I'm just going to trigger that video now, and it just plays next to me, and I've rehearsed with it, so I know how to react to it. And then the final cue of the opening, I am going to jump down from this hovering box onto the stage. I sell that with a little jump. It changes the size of my video again, and boom, I'm on stage, walking around. Boomtown. So now I can begin the show, and this is just taking a 15-second plate shot loop of the museum's stage. I've practiced where to stand on it, and I'm just letting that video play behind me on a loop while I sit here with my live video, and it looks pretty good. And it kind of gives me a sense of that I'm performing now live on their stage, which is awesome. And I've demonstrated for you that I can take us anywhere we want to go. And right now we're just going to kind of bring it home and sit on stage for a little moment. So I hang out here and I'm doing a little bit of chatting while I'm on stage, which is nice. And I'm introducing the concept of who I am and how the show's going to work. And I'm able to control the show very lovely on my phone. Skip ahead because I stay here for a little bit because you've just seen a lot of nonsense and a lot of craziness. So I'll scrub ahead and go to our first cue here where I'm using that same zoom feature to now just slowly zoom in. Now the maximum amount that it will, that a transition can play is 19,999 milliseconds. So there are some times where I zoom in really, really fast and other times where I just go, okay, give me the maximum amount we can do, and that's as slow as it will go. But it's not bad, and it feels like now we have a different angle and we feel we're really connecting with me on stage, which is nice. But again, it is still the same static one camera image, which is cool. So we're about to move into this next cue, that I will keep coming back to throughout the show. And what I've taken is the plate shot of the theater. Again, so this is one of the plate shots of the theater, wide, center stage, just looking at me. I've zoomed into this one for this shot, and now we're going to cut to that first establishing plate shot that we saw, wide, and I have now put these words onto as kind of a transparent, affected layer on top of the wide shot. So it looks like I'm projecting these words onto the curtains. And I'm going to do this throughout the show as a way to walk through this speech in a dynamic way that I can kind of throw something up behind me on stage that looks like a lighting cue or a projection cue. But this is just the museum's plate shot. Then on top of that, my words that I've composited on top. And then on top of that, my video scaled down so it looks like I am small on stage. Another quick tip on that is you'll notice it looks like a different camera angle because we're shooting from what appears to be the side. All that is choreography. So when I know I'm about to cut to that shot, I rotate my body, and then suddenly it looks like there's a second camera from a different angle. And that's just me knowing, and you'll probably catch me as I'm coming in and out of it, I turn in and out of the shots to be able to simulate the idea that we're cutting between multiple cameras, which is the same that I would do if I was doing theater in the round or a thrust stage, to be able to give different viewers a different perspective on the show. So I think that that is just traditional stagecraft and choreography. We're going to hang out here in this shot for a little bit, and what's going to happen is slowly over time, I've taken that same looping video of the backdrop, and I'm going to slowly desaturate it, slowly take away all the color, slowly fade it to darkness, and it's going to slowly go from the stage into just a black void. And the idea being that we're going to slowly transition away from the museum and into some other worlds and graphics to talk about some other things. So we're just going to let this play out slowly over time. Here it comes. Excellent, excellent. Not bad. So now it is darker. I'm in complete blackness, and I've transitioned us cleanly, just as if I did a fade down on stage with lighting or a set change. So very quick and lovely like that. And I hang out here for a little bit until we do just an easy transition from a wide to stretching it out and going to close. And instead of doing that zoom effect, I'm just going to crossfade. So we'll see me in a second go from this shot to a close-up version of the shot, and all that is digitally stretching it out. So I'm putting a nice fade transition between the two so that you can basically fade from one to the other, and it feels like we've, you know, moved or gone to a different part of the screen, or just we're opening up a new part of the storytelling. I want the audience to kind of come in closer with me for that moment. Now while I'm here, I'm going to start talking about my past making kind of YouTube videos and bringing Shakespeare to YouTube. And with that, I'm going to talk about the lab at NYU. Just waiting for it. Here we go. I run through just a pre-recorded video where I go small and I show a couple examples of what the students at NYU in the Integrative Technology Lab have been working on. So that way they get a sense of the different possibilities of what is out there. And then I had a misfire on this cue, actually, where I tried to put these words on the screen. The cue misfired, so I just backed it up. But so you can see, again, those alpha layers that just put something in front of me, and anything that is transparent, it lets it see what is behind it. And then I threw a different backdrop behind me to be able to show the curation of the videos on YouTube for the digital stage, where we did the Shakes 450 monologue project, which was 450 Shakespeare monologues for Shakespeare's 450th birthday. I now go into how we filmed those and the different, you know, tools we used and tricks we used. That's just a general overview until I get to this, which is basically an animated, my own version of an animated XR stage. Amir made a much nicer one. This is the one that I made in Photoshop. And this allows me, I really wanted to focus on showing how you can make a very dynamic static image. So I want to support performance, I want to support the text, and so you're going to see the entire speech that I'm saying just slowly be transcribed behind me. And that's just a pre-recorded video playing behind me, and I've timed it out, and I know how long it runs for. So you're just going to watch that play behind me while I perform Hamlet's To Be or Not to Be, which is great. Hello, Savannah. This is all very informative. I'm glad. Good. And I'm also glad you're there and that the chat is working, because if you have any questions or want me to dive into any of this, please let me know. You can also go down to the links. I'm going to be posting every single tool, open sourced free tool that I used for this presentation. So you'll have links to literally everything that you could be able to do exactly what I'm doing. Otherwise, if you have questions, ask them. I'm here to answer them. We're just going through all more than 70 cues of last night's show, because I'm a glutton for punishment. But I wanted to share with folks how I kind of put this whole thing together. So ask away. As you can see, this video has been playing out while I perform the to be or not to be speech, and it's just slowly transcribing the entire speech behind me and then doing a little lighting effect so that the image feels very dynamic. It's moving, it feels alive, but I'm just sitting there performing a monologue. So it's projection and light design at its finest, which is really cool. So we perform all of that. And then do you remember the tunnel cue where the rectangle came in front of me and switched out the scenes? We're about to have the exact same thing. So this little transcription speech thing that's happening behind me with the handwriting, it ends on a specific frame and then it just loops. It's just going to stay there until I fire the next cue. And when I fire the next cue, it's going to transition with an animation that fills in that last frame. So it wipes like a lighting effect, goes to black, and then comes up out of blackness back out on this wide shot. So that's my way to kind of get out of that. Like instead of having a fade to black or instead of having some sort of a change, that's how I did it. You created all the digital effects yourself. Yes, I created everything from when I first jump on stage and start introducing myself. The very first 90 seconds are kind of the Blue Skies version, a award-winning stage and lighting designer, Amir Cohen, who has a YouTube channel where he demonstrates his own work in fascinating ways. I'll link to it down below. He did the first 90 seconds, which was incredibly kind of him, and it looks amazing. But I could never afford to have somebody do the entire hour show. And so the rest of this has been me inside of Photoshop and Premiere. And what I started doing, if you're kind of wanting to know how do I make a show like this, I started by recording myself just on the green, just boring old green from the one static shot, recording myself stumbling through multiple rehearsals of it, slowly getting a shape of the show, getting the text. And then what I did was started watching them and just taking notes and being like, you know, at 5 minutes I get a little stuck in this moment, I'd love to transition, or hey, at 13 minutes I start talking about this very different thing and I think we want to like come in closer for that. And so that started helping me break down the show into cues of being like, okay, here I want to do this, here I want to do this. And similarly, I took the first 90 seconds, performed it on green, sent it to Amir, we talked back and forth over Zoom or Skype, and basically came up with how we wanted the effects to look and where we wanted to go. And he told me things I didn't even know were possible. And he was like, could you rehearse it this way? And I was like, yes. And then I was challenging him on some things of, I wanted to do this. And he was like, I don't know how to do that. And I was like, I think if we just do this, this, and this, it might work. And he was like, sure. And we tried it, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But yes, basically, he's responsible for the first very sexy 90 seconds. I'm responsible for the rest of it. Of me just doing YouTube tutorials on After Effects and Premiere and Photoshop. So we've gone through a few cues there, but again, they're kind of recycling these same ideas of you'll see some components that are alpha layers in front or some components which are just standard video behind me. And what I found was very helpful in this process was anything that was going to play in front of me is ProRes 4444. I really got to turn that off. I did turn that off. Interesting. Anything that was in front of me is ProRes 4444. Anything that is behind me is H.264, and it is compressed within an inch of its life because I first did the show all in like 4K, super sexy, high quality video, and my CPU really yelled at me. OBS was like, dude, what are you doing? So I compressed all this stuff down so it would stream much more cleanly and really prioritize then the quality of my video. So what's actually kind of nice about that and unintentional is everything else behind me feels almost slightly soft, slightly out of focus, almost like it would if you were watching it with your eyeballs or watching it on a film. So it kind of gives natural depth of field that is unintentional just because the back videos behind me are compressed and the live video feed is a 4K video feed. So where are we in this show? Let me go into, we are just at the third quote where I'm talking about everything that's going on, and I have zoomed in way, way, way on myself, so this is lovely. And you can start to see how we're recycling some of these things, but now we feel comfortable with them. I've established a few angles on stage. I've established that we can move at any time, so when I'm stuck in a frame, it feels like I chose to be there. I want to be there, and I want you to be there for that purpose, which in some ways, I don't know if it worked, but for me as an audience member, when I know that you can move somewhere else, I think that theater, especially archive video theater, suffers sometimes from the fact that people feel like I'm just kind of stuck in this one seat, which is weird that we complain about that virtually when we don't complain about it in the real theater when we're stuck in one seat, but it's a thing we do as people. I'm guilty of it. But you look at things like the National, and what I really wanted to do was say, how do we archive theater? How do we watch kind of theater on demand videos? And can I use some of that same conversation? That was just a transition out of everything. So I just used a one of the standard transitions. It's called a Luma wipe within OBS. And that got me out of what I was talking about, because now I'm going to take a quick little sidebar and tell you a story about when I did regional Shakespeare in Omaha, Nebraska. So I wanted to wipe out of that, make myself smaller, put myself on a rounded stage that looked out into a field, which is the experience of being on stage in Shakespeare on the Green in Omaha. And so that is an actual photo from Shakespeare on the Green with several people in the field, and I just threw an effect on it so that I wasn't dealing with anybody's privacy or likeness or anything like that. Didn't want to get into anybody's copyright stuff. But I just wanted to demonstrate what it is like to stand on that stage and look at that audience. And I talk about my first opening night, looking at that audience and losing my lines because of how many people were out there, because it's several thousand people a night. And then I get into Henry V. And this, if you've been following my videos, you should be very familiar with my Henry V I did for Theater Communications Group's June conference. And this is me recreating that. And this is what started it all. This is what inspired my thought of even doing something like this. So we're now going to just go through the Henry V monologue, which I've done a complete breakdown of cue by cue by cue already in a former video. So, you know, this is just me now comfortably doing it again, which I think in some ways I grappled with whether or not to repeat this one or not. But what I liked about repeating this is, you know, theater is meant to happen over and over and over again. And especially when you're talking about the difference between theater and film, the idea that this is now in my back pocket, that I can stand it up at any time. I'm just firing the same cues. I've choreographed the show. I know my moments. It's a little different every time. I actually think I landed one moment in this version much more smoothly than I did the first time. And I don't land another moment as smoothly. I kind of got a little jittery and rushed through it, which is just a good reminder to trust in your work. Trust what you've created. So this is the TCG. So it's playing. And I can skip ahead because some of you have already seen this. I take a bow, fade to black, and I come back up. And now this is one of those breaks that I treat the blackout cue to fully black me out and bring me back up while I get my music stand out, take a sip of water, take a beat, take a minute, Brendan. Speaking of a minute, we've been doing this for almost an hour now. Thank you for those that have stayed with me. Again, ask any questions that you want and share any component of this that you want, because I'm here to break it down. So this is me back at that lovely establishing shot that we've now covered several times. I am wide. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move into actually showing the audience how I did all this. Kind of like what I'm doing now, but I'm actually going to show my OBS screen live. This is not without its complications. I don't highly recommend showing the audience the switchboard live, but especially because I got very nervous and very thrown when I tried to show them how to add scenes or audio clips, and it didn't. The pop-up went down instead of up, which is where I thought it would go, and that threw me for a second. And then you'll see me click on the scene transition and take a moment of being like, okay, don't change anything, don't move anything, and then I get really freaked out when I start talking about the streaming and recording. I'm like, no, don't touch that. But this was me opening it up and kind of pulling the curtain back and being like, this is how I'm running the show right now. This is what we're doing. And I walked them through how OBS generally works and pulls in different media feeds. But we're doing that now anyway. So then I went ahead and demoed out a few things like I have now, where I basically said like, hey, you could throw the XR stage up there, we could change lighting, we could change other effects, pull back into our standard wide shot that we've now seen many times. This is a moment where the show misfired. This little zoom cue, when you go from very, very wide to very, very close, sometimes has a mind of its own. And in some ways, I kind of enjoy this because that is live theater. Sometimes the cue was going to misfire, or the scenery might be moved in the wrong place on a performance one night, and it might change something or throw you a little bit or keep it fresh and alive. And so in some ways, when we get into the conversation of live performance virtually, even though the robots are pretty precise, sometimes they get a little out of there. What was the transition add-on for OBS called? So this is called a motion, it's a move transition, motion transition. I'm going to put it down in the thing down below. It's called the motion plugin from GitHub, CatXFish. Created this motion effect. It used to be you would have to literally go by origin points, and you'd have to like type them in and dial it in slowly. Now literally you basically, the key in the zoom thing is you're starting with one frame, which is one cue. Then your next cue is that cue embedded as a source. So when you go to adding a source in OBS, you can actually add a scene. And what you're going to do is add the scene of your former cue and then stretch it out in the direction that you want it to go. And then that motion thing is going to basically go from QA to QB, filling in the gaps of basically being like, oh, I've got to move from wide image to small image, or from small image to wide image. And that's what makes it look like the camera's moving, which is super cool. But again, I'm going to put all these in the description for streaming purposes. I could not load up, it's like 3,000 characters of links and treats and goodies for everyone. So I'm going to put that in once I finish streaming. So now you see me demonstrating the Snap camera live, and you probably saw some ghosting if you click back, and we'll probably see it again now. The Snapchat camera is a few seconds behind in latency, or milliseconds, and it's color corrected slightly differently because it's not taking the 4K image straight out of the camera. I'm basically taking the Snap Cam filter image, which is lower resolution. So anytime I'm using the Snapchat camera, there's a little bit of a delay and there's a little bit of a quality loss, if you will. Now I'm talking back again in here, and what I'm basically going to be winding into is our next demonstration, which is OBS.ninja. I have shown so many tools. In this, I'm talking about the baby monitors and the IP cameras and all that other stuff. I owe a video update on all the different tools that I've been using to add scene partners to a scene in real time. This one that we're using for both this presentation and for the talkback at the end is called OBS.ninja, and it allows anybody in the world, even on their phone, to basically give you a live feed of what their camera sees, which is super cool. And then you can just grab that and throw it in either as a browser source or a window capture in OBS. So that's what I'm about to do here. You see the staff at the museum joins me from 2 different green screen areas that they have, 2 different cameras, and I'm just going to go in, pull them in from an OBS.ninja feed, which is a lovely feature created by, let's see if I have it, not on me, but it will be in the description once this video is done, and it's very cool. And I pulled out their green screen, I've got their audio, I've got their video, and I can then composite them anywhere I want on stage. And what's cool about OBS.ninja is because it's using that URL, once I composite them, if we were rehearsing, it's going to stay. So every time they activate their camera, as long as it doesn't move a whole lot, you can basically start really blocking in where people are, so you don't have to reset it every single time. So this is where I think there's a lot of potential to start playing with it. Is it perfect? No, but it's free. It's free. Can't beat the price. Just checking the chat. Thank you, Cash. It's very kind of you. So now what I do is I composite us into a scene for a Midsummer Night's Dream. So I take the two of them and I'm going to turn them into fairies. So we have James playing Titania, the fairy queen. We have Danny playing Mustard Seed and Cobweb. I'm going to play Bottom, and we're going to see that snap camera, again, really chugging. I'm taking it to within an inch of its life, but I'm going to give myself, of course, the famous donkey head, a lovely painting from Alina Sohail that I drop in the backdrop here, and now we're performing a scene. Right there in real time, I've composited two performers from other places in the world. I've given them a little bit of a costume. I'm giving myself a little bit of a costume in real life. I've given us a scenery and a backdrop. We can hear each other, we can see each other, and now we're going to do a scene, which is really, really, really cool. I mean, that's theater. And I would say that if any high school or college is just trying to stand up some work, this is a great way to do it socially distanced. To me, this is, especially because it's free, yes, it's a little glitchy, it's got a little rough edges, you could certainly buy your way into some better solutions. But as far as everybody, ubiquitous access, getting out of Zoom, getting out of the Brady Bunch boxes, and actually getting to composite each other on stage together, it's not bad. So you see that I'm just wildly, I've got to be really close to the camera to get that Snapchat filter to work, specifically this one. Snap camera or snap filters are getting better and better, so now they actually have full body trackers. So if you know someone or can hire someone to build you a Snapchat filter, you could probably build one that just would track your head from further away, but this one has to be very close because it's meant to be a phone selfie one. So I'm very close to the camera, which means I can't see my monitor. I'm away from my keyboard. I'm literally responding to the audio cues, and I've blocked where I know that they are. And I'm flying blind here, which means that when I go to sleep, I can't see anything, and I've got to be able to trust that transition. So this is where I'm going to hit that bottom wake up button, and you'll see everything just fades away nicely, and we're back on that red curtain world. So we're going to see me start to fall asleep, which allows me to look down, hit the button that I know is going to fire the correct cue, thank goodness, and it's going to send away my scene partners, it's going to send away this backdrop, it's going to send away my Snapchat camera, and just leave me alone on stage. Now you'll notice I'm a little blurry. That's because I'm much closer to the camera, and I've focused it for me to be way back there. So know that that is the quality deficit in this moment, is that I can't also rack focus for myself live without touching the camera. So I'm going to be here in the foreground for a little minute, and then I'm going to sell getting back up on stage. I kind of hop to kind of pretend that I'm having to jump back on stage. And now I'm in full quality because I'm where the lens is expecting me and is focused for me to be. I perform a little bit of course, Bottom's speech, and then I'm able to cut to the next cue, which brings their videos composited completely differently. So instead of being the small little fairies, I have them full frame with me on stage, and we can respond and talk and interact with each other, which is awesome. So this is kind of my live demo for this. We can see and hear each other and respond to each other with a little bit of rehearsal. This was done completely on the fly. So, you know, if we rehearsed this out and blocked this out, you could really do some cool, impressive stuff with it. But for the sake of this, we just threw each other on stage and reacted in real time, took a bow, went to blackout, removed their videos, and now they're done. I've built in a little break for myself because I'm about to rattle off a whole bunch of jargon. And so I need a little sip of water for that. I've got a little music cue playing that tells me I've got some transition time, and then the cue ends and I know I'm able to start talking again and continue the show pretty seamlessly. It's not bad. So now I'm going to go into a variety of basically back-to-back examples of other people utilizing XR tools in virtual theater, and basically different ways to make virtual theater. So I just want to shout out to all the incredible community members that are trying different things in this moment. And this is me kind of giving a state of the nation, if you will, in virtual theater making. So I rattle through a bunch of different examples here, ending on just a nice black open frame for me to talk. And then I want to, of course, get back to my connection. I start going into the history of health pandemics in theater. You know, Shakespeare, of course, not a stranger to a pandemic. And so we talk a little bit about the plague and about what that meant for London and theater community of that time, just to kind of give a historical backdrop of both. Chris, this is awesome. Are you using all laptops or a mix of laptop cams and phone cams for the actor-to-actor interaction? I think what you're asking me is like when those actors joined me on stage. They can use anything. So I have done a performance. We did one last weekend at the Here Festival where we had an actor in Los Angeles, an actor in New York, and an actor in San Francisco. They each used their phones to be able to log into OBS.ninja, and then we took those 3 phone videos and put them composited on a stage. We removed backdrops, we did the whole 9 yards, and we made it so that these 3 actors appeared to be in the same boat, because this was a play of 3 people in a boat. So we did that with all phone cameras, but it could be mix and match. It's basically whatever camera folks have access to. For this show, I was just using a DSLR camera on a tripod into OBS. So I'm using a DSLR for the show. I'm not sure what the museum staff was using. Penn says, were you able to check out OBS.ninja? Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about, Penn. Welcome, greetings. So yes, all of this was utilizing OBS.ninja for all of the guesting. And then the museum had never heard of OBS.ninja. So thank you to Penn for the rec. And so we actually used OBS.ninja for the Q&A at the end, where I then swapped signals, let them have complete control of the OBS stream, and just used an OBS.ninja feed of me rather than the other way around. It's not bad. Look at it. Look at it all coming together. I now talk about, I go into kind of tragedy, which leads us into the world of Macbeth. And I start talking about the story of Macbeth. And of course, the final speech, the famous speech of tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And to get into that, I wanted to talk about my own adaptation of Macbeth called A Tale Told by an Idiot, where I used an Xbox Kinect to take motion capture data of my actors and turn them into VR avatars. And so I start setting that up and go into a full demo live with the Xbox Kinect camera. So we're about to get into that. So this is just bringing it straight in. It's seeing my skeletal data and my bones, and then I switch over using a program called iRig to be able to actually, in real time, drop in an avatar for kind of a quick previs. So this is a way that I'm able to show in real time that I can become a 3D character on stage using a depth camera, using the Xbox Kinect, which you can get on eBay for like 50 bucks. The Xbox also does volumetric video, or point cloud. And so I then start demonstrating that. And for me, this is probably the thing I'm most excited about when it comes to motion, real-time capture and depth capture, is I really am excited about the idea of holograms and holographic performance, to be able to put 2 performers from different remote locations onto the same physical space and stage. And so I wanted to really showcase the ability to use volumetric video, because I think there's a lot of potential for that moving forward. So this is then me performing a little bit of Macbeth with volumetric video. Have I used Character Animator from Adobe? I have. In my experience, the limitation on that has been, it's basically you're building a Photoshop file with the different layers, and then it's performing, which is kind of similar to the Snapchat filter thing and could be a really cool rabbit hole to go down if I wanted to build my own filters without using the Snap camera. Now that I'm thinking about it, this sounds very exciting. So thank you for pointing that out. That might be a rabbit hole. If you've used it, please document, share early, share often. Tell me how your experiments go, because that would be very, very cool. So here's a little Henry V motion capture, volumetric video, point cloud. Again, using an Xbox Kinect that is going into a PC laptop that then is streaming out from OBS over my network, and then I'm using the internal network IP on my desktop to be able to grab that signal, so that way it has its own dedicated setup that doesn't interrupt the rest of the show. I love the idea that I could basically walk through the audience at the end as a volumetric character, so that's why I gave myself a blackout. I used myself, my body, as the way to create the transition. Now that we've been showing all these other transitions that are digitally built in, the idea of using the artist's instrument as the blackout or as the transition felt really cool to me. We're back in this wide shot. I start getting into kind of the personal story for me of this pandemic and kind of my low point, to kind of be reflective of where we all are and how this impacts all of us. And really kind of sitting with the audience in this moment. So again, I'm just a nice clean zoom in, nothing fancy, just trying to really connect and let you know how this has affected me and why I want to give these tools away for free so that other people who are hurting can make art and get back to work. I stand up out of that, kind of transitioning now towards our final act with excitement, with enthusiasm, into a nice wide of the Stoppard quote that basically being in a box is better than no life at all. And now we're going to transition to what I call what should I call this? I just wanted to kind of mix it up. You know, we've been in this red curtain world the whole time. We feel, you know, we're coming on like 40 minutes into the show. We feel like we've got it, we've seen it. So I just wanted to throw a completely different palette and hue at everybody and open up kind of a new part of the show. And this is where I start unpacking all of my work with Mozilla Hubs, social VR, the future stages, and really start introducing those concepts and components. Through that, I wanted to introduce Spoke, the architecture part of it, and talking about how I kind of designed and built the theater. And then I'm going to transition from this queue into a browser queue, and this is just the opening frame whenever you enter the future stages. So what I did was I worked backwards, and I took basically what does it look like when I log in to future stages, take that screen grab, I affected that into that kind of blueprint texture so that then I could let it morph as if we were talking speculatively about design, and then we brought it into reality. So now we are literally inside of the browser of the future stages in Mozilla Hubs while I'm talking about it and explaining the work that others have already been doing in there. And then I'm going to be able to just grab my keyboard in a second. Do it, Brendan. And I'll be able to start immediately walking around and looking around this space. So that was a way to really cleanly transition, keep the energy going, not sit there and stop and load something up in front of the audience. And that's where that Hubs Room button was really important, because I was able to just flip the switch and have Hubs open and ready for me to start moving and walking around without crushing up my CPU. So that's exciting. Excellent, excellent. Now we're walking into this theater that I built for this component, for this demo. And I sit us in a seat, I frame up, I can continue talking over the side over here, and now I'm going to grab that VR headset, which is a Pico Neo 2, and there's information about that down below, or there will be. And I then show the rest of the demo as an avatar while you can also see me performing. So this way I'm able to do both. Look at me go. And what I wanted to show was flipping between a variety of different avatars. So what I've done is behind the avatar that is currently acting as the camera, as the backdrop, I've stacked up a bunch of links to Mozilla avatars that were just in the Mozilla library. And I've literally just put them on the wall, kind of like pinning them to the wall. And when I hover over each one of them with my controller, it gives me the option to use that avatar, which allows me to switch in real time into that avatar. So there will be a little bit of a blink or a glitch as it switches over each time, but I'm basically doing all the worlds of stage, talking about the 7 acts of man, and I'm switching between each of these avatars to show the potential for different costume, different character inside of a virtual world, and how expressive and performative these avatars can be, that you really can suggest a lot of character. Ah, theater in the round, that's how I began. So here I'm just flipping through a variety of avatars, almost like a quick change on set, to be able to perform these different characters, which is super fun. And then if you want, the audience can still see me, the actor, performing almost like a puppeteer, but we've really focused it in our showcasing the puppet, which is the virtual reality avatar. At the very end of this, you'll notice I demoed this black cube that's floating up in the sky right now. And then there's one on the stage behind me, which is a spawner cube that I can just grab as many of them as I want. What I'm going to do is, again, in the same way that for Macbeth, I covered the frame to simulate a transition or a blackout, I realized that I could take this cube and just move it in front of the avatar that is acting as the camera and create my own organic blackout. Again, trying to keep it as live, on the fly, performer controlled as possible so that it feels, you know, real and authentic. Can you make a custom avatar? Yes. You can make custom avatars in hubs and pretty much in VR chat and in any VR platform. You just need to know modeling and animation and all sorts of other stuff, which I'm not great at. So I've made like 2 really crappy avatars so far. But for this demo, I've been using better avatars by people who know what they're doing. But yes, Hubs, for example, has a default avatar Blender file that you can open up and then just, apparently whatever you put on it, like you could just keep the bones and get rid of all the meshes and then just add your own mesh, and that's a thing. There's also a thing called readyplayer.me where you can take a selfie of yourself and it will make an avatar that looks like you within some degree of certainty. We start coming towards, we're turning a corner now. We're out of the last product demo. We're now wrapping up the show. I rattle through a bunch of different potential technologies that we could be activating, we could be using, you know, that the possibilities really are limitless that we could be working on together. And I end, of course, with one of my favorites, which is Prospero's speech to swear off his magic and his spells, and I'm taking away all of the magic now. I'm going to take away all the green screen removal, take away all the backdrops. You know, the color correction is not as fancy and special, and I'm just going to show the whole room now. Like, this is where I've been performing the whole show, the whole night, and I just continue this speech, and I slowly start breaking down the elements. So I'm actually going to tear down my green screen as part of this speech to fully take away everything that we've done tonight. So you're basically seeing this is the raw backstage look at how this whole thing got made. Here we are. I'm going to turn off my overhead light that was simulating that spotlight that I talked about at the beginning. So now I'm much darker. And my final cue here is, again, that zoom effect, just so that we're not distracted by all the nonsense that's in my room. And I'm now just slowly adding, again, that alpha layer concept. I'm slowly adding a vignette and slowly darkening everything else around me. So it's just illuminating this little portion of the screen and slowly fading everything else or covering everything else with darkness. And this allows us to really narrow the focus in, focus on me, not get distracted by kind of, you know, everything else around me, and have one last little moment, head and shoulders, standing there with the audience as I go through Tom Stoppard's speech one final time now that we've deconstructed it using all these different technologies. Final cue of the night, we are going to fade down to blackness at the very end here. Here we go. Here we go. Holding for Q74 and Q74. Not yet. Stand by. Q74. Go. And it fades to black, and we're out of the show. And now I'll do a fade up from black, back on me, full wide, taking a bow. I've got some little credits that'll play like an alpha layer over top of me while I put the curtain back up, which allows the museum to remove my backdrop and put me on stage for the Q&A, so that we don't end the show with me in whatever this is and the moderator actually on a nice green screen stage. So this allows me to put everything back the way that it was, sort of. You can see me flailing about, knocking things over, grab a chair, and present the final show. So that is, let's get back into this filter here. That is me going cue by cue through the entire show. We did it. That's what I made inside of OBS, to be able to present this crazy, weird thing to the world. If you have any outstanding questions after everything we went down, please let me know in those comments. I am going to make a better attempt to start going through actual tutorial videos like I used to be doing before I made basically an hour-long tutorial live. I'm excited to kind of resume where I left off and start dialing in some of these technologies and some of these tools and some of these workflows so that we can all figure it out together. So that is today's little breakdown of what I've been doing for the last 2 months. Thank you for all the great questions. Thanks for all the support. And please share the Museum of Science's video. It's so incredible that they were willing to host an artist like me in this very weird time, to take a complete risk. I've never done a one-man show before, and they completely supported me in this endeavor and made all this fanciness happen. And it was me who was really like holding us back on wanting to do everything open source, everything freemium, so that people could be empowered to make it happen. And because of them, the program was given away for free and is streaming on their channel. So please go support them and go check that out. And if you're new here, you know all the things. You can like, subscribe, and share, and comment, and be nice to other people. That's really the primary rule. Let me know if you want me to explain something a little differently or a little better. And now it's your turn. Now go create something. See you later.